Okay, we are recording. Welcome to week number 4, coming to you live from China with all the excitement as always. I'll keep the camera on and everything, but if I notice any slowness, I'll turn it off. But so far, everything from here has been pretty good, thanks to my VPN. Or else I'd have serious problems. Um, so a couple housekeeping. The biggest one is the quiz. 2 people haven't done it. So I'm not going to pull up the list and all that because the grades are there. But the rest of you have, that's good. The quiz closes at 5, I believe, today, or 3 or 5, I can't remember. So if you haven't done it and you're one of the 2, please do it. Hybrid learning, awesome. A lot of people got in and did them. Now we're at that point now where I want to get into the mode where the hybrid portion is done leading up to the class. So I'm glad prior to this class, I think I'm 11 of you. So it's some really good stuff too. So I can use that. It helps to mold even how we deliver this here today. It will close tomorrow. And the way I've had them set now is all the hybrid learnings close after the class. I'm tempted to make them close before the class because that kind of forces you to do them before, but I'll leave a bit of leeway. So each week, the one item will close. And that's important because I don't want you to fall behind on items because more and more things will start to crop up, like the assignments, which for me are my favorite part. Can't wait till next week. You get to see the first assignment. You get to shake your head at me and say, oh my God, Brent, seriously? But it'll be good, I promise. So that's the breakdown. And if you missed a hybrid learning, obviously I think there's 13 or 14 of them, 15%. So if one you missed, it's 1 point, I think it's 1.1 or 1.15 on the final. But it's a shame to miss it because all you got to do is write something. So, okay. That's that. That's that. So I wanted to go to, so the discussion topic, all of you on, let me put some of you on the spot. Anybody want to say something about what they wrote in the discussion for those who did? Somebody say something. Or else I'll unmute someone, but I don't know who's written anything. So hopefully one of you have written something on there. Any thoughts about software? Initial thoughts? I've got a shy group of people, man. Come on. Somebody's got to say something about software. Confusing, too many, too little.
There are too many.
Okay, too many.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I have a question for everybody because this came up last time, actually the last 2 years. I noticed a couple of you under civil put structural items. And if I remember, when I did work in India, civil meant structural. And I think the same in the United Arab Emirates. Does that resonate for some of you? When I say the word civil, are you thinking structural versus like roads and bridges and linear infrastructure? Anybody? Trying to see head nods. I want some engagement, man. But does that carry any confusion for anybody? Because some of those matrices, civil were listing some structural things. So okay, I'll stop trying to put you on the spot. It's not working. You will all be presenting in the last week. Let me remind you of that. You guys will be running the class at the last week. So you got to be comfortable to talk. And if you're not, that's the whole point, is try to make you more comfortable, which is why I want you to do the hybrid so I can try to pick on people, but try to get some dialogue, because the point is that when you get out into the industry and you're placed in front of, let's say I'm a project manager for a project in India, and I say, what software I'm supposed to use? I say civil, and you come to me and say, use Revit. But are you talking structural, and am I talking civil as in North America? Now, if I'm in India, maybe I'm talking structural. And I noticed that with in both an IBI and CH2M Hill, we had to clarify that. I work for a global firm. So when we say civil, we say linear infrastructure. When we want to say structural, we say structural. And a lot of firms where we have offices all across the world, we got to get to that common so that because the scariest, imagine deliverable at 10% and you've tried to do stuff in Revit. That would be kind of not good. And we'll go through some reasons there. Or you're just doing bridges. You think, okay, he wants just the civil structures to be done. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in with the term civil structures. Okay, so people like to chat apparently in the chat window and not verbally. We're gonna fix that, I promise. Yeah, so civil is mostly related to structure. That's what Shit said. Sorry, where are we? I know how to say your name. CM. You use civil for both. Suman, the same thing. Lokasharan. I don't know if I said that right at all. I apologize. Civil is dealing with estimating, geotech, GIS surveying, structural, the specific. Yeah. Okay. So yes, and this is the challenge. I realize that, and that's why I think that discussion topic, I always find it intriguing, especially when there's a lot of international students. So when I go through the presentation stuff today, I'll clarify how I'm conveying it and the more common approach in North America, and it looks like Europe as well. Especially the UK, but I've noticed less of a confusion in mainland Europe as well, and Australia. But definitely the Middle East, India, even I think here in China as well. When I was hearing the translations to the presentations, civil was used very, I don't want to say haphazardly, but inconsistently. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, wow, okay, it's, yes. Okay, awesome. Good. Before I get to the presentation stuff, I added on here, so if you go all the way to the bottom, I added class recordings. So the reason I did that is if you hopefully you read all the announcements I post, because I post them for you guys at George Brown, and I'm hopefully posting them to the right ones. And anyway, the Zoom recordings disappear in 30 days. So when we're done the class, I think 2-3 hours later, it's on there. Really cool technology. You see the video, you actually see transcripts of every single word I say. So it's actually pretty awesome, but it all disappears in 30 days. So what I do is I upload the video to my YouTube channel, and then I just put a direct link to them so you're not fishing around. And then they're there for those, especially for those who missed the class or want to look back later on. When you're doing the quizzes, I highly recommend just doing them by instinct, but you can always go back because they're quizzes on your own time. They're open book. You can see the nature of the quiz. It's not a lot, like, you know, I think they range. The last one was 10. I think they're either 10 to 15 questions, depending on how many questions I had made up. So you feel free to use whatever media is at your disposal, but I just, you know, instinct. Final exam is literally all true and false. I like to say, use your instinct. Hopefully hearing me talk helps. But I know you have a lot of classes and everything. So that's why those are there. Okay, let's jump into this week. So just looking back before we go to number 4, 3 weeks ago, talked about just BIM in general, under the assumption that you're going to get bombarded with all of us telling you about BIM in general. We do have general undertone consistency, which is usually a good thing. I don't give it a second to pop up here. What's it doing? How fun. See, that's my slowness. All right, hopefully it comes up. So yeah, I gave you an overview, and in that presentation, I touched on software, which is what today's topic is going to be on. Project definition and deliverables. So the foundation of that is don't do anything if you don't know if you don't know what your client wants. Hence, we did the client requirements in week 2. And I always say in the industry today, even in projects that I'm working on, we're starting on right now, we have this same exact problem. What's the client's deliverable? I don't know. Ask the client. We don't know who to ask in the client. And it's just, how did we even sign a contract and we don't know? Now, usually we use our better judgment, so we have a good idea. But you know, from a requirement, it could be software, it could be data, models, drawings, who knows? There could be relationship needs, there could be contractual obligations. You could have deliverables to other people. So the architecture firm, might have to do something for the contractor. And that might be pressed upon me by my owner. And that all depends on the BIM execution plan. So normally the client will list some insanity. And I said, you take chaos and you bring it into order. So the green bubbles becomes the one big green bubble. Remember things like that, go to a firm and say, I want to take all your bubbles and make it one. That's what we do. That's one of the things, right? How to make these things understandable. That's the BIM execution plan. Then with that plan comes now these next 4 weeks, okay? So the client is going to say, I want a bunch of things, or the client is going to say, I don't care. Just give me the deliverable or I'm not going to pay you. And you get them all, and that's okay. Once you have that, then the question is going to be, great. Now I know what I need to do for the client side. What should I do now for us and all of the stakeholders, which include the client? So BIM is not software. BIM is by no means defined by Revit, but my goodness, you have to have the right software. So software is an important piece, which is why I devote this class to it. But notice the next ones. So today we'll talk about BIM, what I call BIM authoring software, and then I'll allude to a bit of collaboration. I believe, this is just me, I couldn't care less if you use Revit or not, unless the client says, I want Revit. Then you use, there's no question. But if there was no client deliverable and some of your matrices were great, Vectorworks, Allplan, one of you wrote BricsCAD, which is one that is probably my least familiar, but it's there, right? If it's an appropriate means to achieve the deliverable, awesome. This is what concerns me the most when we get to next week. How do we share all this stuff? And in what ways are we sharing? So for me, that's like if we're climbing up a hill, that's when we hit a peak. Once we hit that point of collaboration, to figure out how exactly we're going to share it. I'll elaborate on authoring profusely in a second, because that's basically BIM authorship is the applications that we use to create components, to build our models, to author our models. So you'll hear me use the term, and I'll talk when we get in the presentation about BIM authoring tools, as different than BIM collaboration tools, which is next week. And that's why I asked building civil plant, analysis, and sharing. When we get to BIM uses, we'll touch on analysis, possible analysis tools, and other tools. So if I've authored a model, Revit is a BIM authoring tool, I'm sharing it, then I want to do stuff with it. But again, remember scope, schedule, budget. What are my BIM uses? What are the purposes at the project level? You don't do everything you can do just because you have a BIM. You purpose fit what you're BIMing and why you're BIMing it, right? That's what we get to week 6. And then week 7, I want to try to expose you to, here's a whole host of things you could be asked for, right? We don't know. You go into each project with the hope that the deliverable is the simplest. They want PDFs of the 2D representation of the model, PDFs of my sheet. Achievable from anything. And then you get far more complex deliverable requirements, which we'll talk about there. And then week 8, we get into the second assignment, which basically I give you one project problem, a whole host of goodies. And I say, what would you tell me as a PM, right? Week 5's assignment is 3 projects, a whole host of smaller goodies. And the question is, how would you share? I give you the solution, and I want advice on how would I share that. And the 2 assignments are just you envisioning, I'm your PM, it's a small firm, a big firm, I don't care. And I want your advice because you're now becoming the experts. And as you're sitting there, you say, but my goodness, we're not the experts yet. I know, that's the test. The assignments are not right and wrong. The assignments are put some thought and give me something. And then they build to this last presentation where I force you into groups, take the 2 assignment things, jam it all together, assign each group a project, force you guys to talk amongst yourselves, force you all to agree, force you to make an execution plan, and then force you to present it to me as a group. And that's exciting for me because that, I'm telling you, that is so real life. And I give you like weeks to plan it. And that's all, that plus your other courses. I get called into the, Brent, we need you in a meeting. I walk in, Brent, this is the stuff. What do we do? I'm like, can I even read the stuff? Like, what do you, I don't know. And that's, half of my career right now, which is kind of nuts, but fun. So with that, let's jump into the PowerPoint. And as I said, today it's all about software and what that means when I say BIM software or BIM authoring software. So I'll touch on that right now. BIM authoring, very unique statement, and that's the most complex part. That's all the bits about how to create, and I always say, look around you, wherever you're sitting. How would you author the stuff you see? I've got, where would I author this light, right? I have a window over there. How would I author that? Street lights, if you can see through my window there. Street lights, road, how would I author that? And it's not just about, I'm an architect, I'm gonna buy Revit, I'm good. It's never like that, okay? That's how when you go into a firm, that's what you might want. That's what the firm might want. Look, we just bought this software. We just bought ArchiCAD. Let's just use it. You say, but all the team is using Revit and the client wants Revit. You might have to use Revit. No, we don't want it. You'll hear that all the time. The good old days of AutoCAD. Can't we just do that? Well, no. So building civil plans. When I talk BIM authorship, and I jumped through this slide the first day. The reason I define them this way are two main reasons. Number one, all of the vendors define it this way. So if you go to a vendor, they'll usually tell you, we've got tools for vertical buildings, tools for linear infrastructure, tools for heavy industrial, plant, process, whatever, manufacturing, whatever you want to call it. The other reason is you've got data standards that ensure interoperability to some extent across those tools. So if you think Revit, EcoSim, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, etc., right? I'll bring that up. If you look at these tools, and I have Vectorworks in here, I don't have Allplan. Allplan is in the same vendor. I don't have BricsCAD. So my trusty bullet called Other covers me, all good. ISO 16, oh my God, the IFC ISO standard, 16569, 16924, whatever it is, 16, 3 digits. That ensures common data taxonomy across building applications. What that means, door is door, wall is wall, slab is slab, roof is roof. Simple, right? If Revit does something phenomenally complex, the IFC standard will say, looks good, don't know what you mean. So you have a wall, you've added all of these weird parameters that don't recognize or aren't part of the standard. We're going to grab wall, maybe material, fire rating, and all that other garbage you keep in Revit. And I'll take those three pieces, wall, material, fire rating, plus length, width, height, area, volume, all fundamental things, and give it to ArchiCAD, give it to Vectorworks, give it to whatever, that wall and those fundamental data taxonomy components will cross over. With that, we also have the ability to analyze. Let me just see. I'll talk about plans in just a moment. So give me a second there. Because of the common taxonomy, when I say do an energy analysis, because walls, floors, roofs, windows, doors, etc., are all common, window is transparent, and it asks how transparent. Door is operable, so I can analyze what happens when the area of the door is open versus closed. It knows that wall must hit roof. If it doesn't, it'll identify there's a problem. So all of those things come into play because the components are common and they can feed. If you hear any discussion about automatic permitting, so e-permitting online, where you, instead of deliver drawings to a jurisdiction to get a permit, deliver a model. Well, the only way that could happen is if there's common authorship of the building components, so that someone can build the appropriate permitting analysis and not worry, is it in Revit, is it in Rhino, is it in Vectorworks? It'll just come to me in the common format of IFC and it'll work. Building very explicitly architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, interiors. Those are usually the 6 disciplines. You can get, you hear others like security or AV, audio-visual, networking, etc. But a lot of those are usually, I think everything I just said is a low voltage subset of electrical. So they've gone on their own world. Wireless, right? We have IoT might be a subset, but that again is not low voltage. It's a wireless subset of electrical in theory because it has to be powered from somewhere. So usually those are the 6 main: arc, struct, and mechanical, electrical, plumbing, interiors. 6 main disciplines that cover building. I'll save plans for last because it is my favorite. As an architect, disturbingly, plants is my favorite. Civil, same concept. There's no governing ISO standard to my knowledge, but there is a whole host of GIS standards about data layers, as well as the exchange capabilities that allow what's called a digital terrain model, a DTM. That's what you build in the civil application, and from that DTM, you get your topography, your subsurface layers, utilities, whether they're buried, exposed, pressurized, gravity, plan and profile drawings. So if I have a roadway with a center line, so let's say it's a 10-kilometer road, and you tell me, Brent, I want a cross section on the road at every 100 meters, right? That's 10 per kilometer. Do the math right, 10 per kilometer times 10, that's 100 drawings. Click a button and they all just appear. Plan and proof. It's such a beautiful thing. And the beauty of the road is you're just basically telling it what you want. So I want a road with a little bit of a slope. Might want to add a curb. The curb will need a bit of a footing. It's going to have 5 layers. Maybe there's going to be asphalt, compact fill, small gravel, large gravel, and then compact dirt, and then the normal ground. So there's all your layers. And then you tell it, you know what, at kilometer 3, I have bad subsurface, bad soil. So all of that's going to be thicker. At kilometer 9, there's going to be a waterway. So we have to do something completely different. And you do all of that, and it calculates, it gets all the merging. It is a beautiful thing. Anybody tries to say, well, we could do that in Revit, I just laugh. Like, no, you can't. You just can't. And then the integration with GIS. So you do all of that, put it into an overall GIS layer. GIS people hate when I say this, but it's like awesome Google Maps, and they hate that, but it's ArcGIS. You have your Google Map type thing, basically data layers pulled in from multiple sources in a mapping environment, representing all of that stuff across the linear infrastructure. So I skipped over in buildings. These are usually, so when you think, well, Brent, you're going to quiz us on this stuff, these are usually the things that will appear on the quiz. And I might say, which one of the following is a building BIM authoring tool? And I would have a question could say Revit, Civil 3D, and a couple plant ones. And you would say, well, it's obviously Revit. Which, and if you hear me use the term, which is a civil BIM authoring tool, you can see there's much less. And this is an intriguing thing. So ArcGIS, it's loosely, like I wouldn't go in there to model, I would go in there to bring all my data together. To actually model itself, it's really AutoCAD Civil 3D. So really Autodesk has, Autodesk's marketing engine is a powerful thing, right? So they've got really the market share on that. Bentley, though, they're far more known for their civil tools than they are for their building. Far more. Like I actually, my history, I learned Bentley's EcoSim, which is now branded Open Building. So these firms kill me with their brand naming, but whatever. I learned on EcoSim first from 02 to 08, 09. And then all of a sudden, Revit. And I said, I better learn this Revit thing. I don't know why everybody's talking about Revit. And then, of course, as an architect, I had both. And I said, oh, okay, I see why. But there's things in Revit that really, really sucks. And in EcoSim, it's really good. So I said, man, can't the two come together? But not yet. What Bentley's done, Bentley is notorious for, sorry, let me rephrase that. Autodesk is notorious for buying firms and leaving them. So you've got the Revit file format, the AutoCAD file format, the Navisworks file format. Say, really? The Inventor file format? Like how many file formats can be under one software vendor? Bentley, on the other hand, they acquire firms and their mission is to pull them all together. And their format is DGN. Everything is DGN. And there's a beauty about that where if you've ever been modeling saying, I'd like to live link in civil, right? All of a sudden in the world of Revit, shared published coordinates linking in a DWG and it's a big blob and then blah, blah, blah. And then if civil wants to link in Revit, good luck. Bentley, we're working on my projects. I would live link in the inroads file. It's there. Turn it off, turn it on. I could actually interrogate components. I could snap to components. It was a thing of beauty. So that alone, it's amazing. The problem is these three names, Inroads, Geopack, and MX. So Bentley acquired Geopack and MX. So for years, those were prevalent. 6 years ago, they created the Open Roads brand. And under Open Roads were those three things. And only a year ago, there's finally the newest version of all three of these is called Open Roads. One software. Thing of beauty. But just so you're aware, if you come from the Asia Pacific, Australasia, MX is more prevalent over here. So I first learned of that working on a project in Singapore and Australia, and MX comes from this side, a little bit in UAE as well. Geopack and Inroads are kind of North America, UK. So departments of transportation in the States, half of them were Inroads, half of them were Geopack. And then some of them are going to Civil 3D, and now it's a mix of Civil 3D and Open Roads. And you go around the United States saying, really? And it's worse in Canada. In Canada, provincially, so we'll just pick on Ontario. No, Ontario and Alberta, okay? Alberta, provincially, they say, do what you want. Edmonton and Calgary, infrastructure, say, do MicroStation. Other municipalities say, do Civil 3D. In Ontario, Ministry of Transportation, Inroads only. Not even Open Roads. Not open, say, not the new one. I want Inroads from 10 years ago. TTC, Toronto Transit Commission, Bentley only. And I want Bentley from 20 years ago. The standard is mind-bogglingly disturbing. We're pressing them to bring it forward, but it's a 10-year-old software standard. City of Ottawa is pressing open roads. Most current. They're actually building a data set right now, and we're helping them do that. So really cool stuff. But that's the challenge. And that's why I say that EIR, all I need to see is Bentley deliverable in a format like it used to be called like the DGN J format, MicroStation J. If I see that, I know there's a major deliverable issue, okay? Or if I see a GeoPack database as opposed to an open road. So things like that will trigger. Plant. This, and when I get to the later slides, Plant is intriguing because it is governed by ISO standard 15926, not the 16569. I'm going to memorize that at some point in my career, not the IFC ISO standard. So it's a very specific plant-based standard, does similar things. A valve is a valve, a pipe is a pipe, you know, et cetera. But then it gets into the nitty-gritty of the difference between a knife valve versus ball valve, gate valve, screw valve, etc. And then what are particulars that could actually drive those components? So it gets into the spec, and I'll show the specs later. But what makes this important is, I always say in the world of plant, you don't just do a pipe. It's not like plumbing, where I model a pipe in Revit and you call it cold water, hot water, ABS drain, so your sanitary drain, sewer drain, whatever. This is specifically, I'm modeling a pipe and it contains a flow. The flow is governed by a spec, and the spec says all of the components and pieces that could be part of that flow stream. So, and what I mean by that, let's say you have a pipe made of high density plastic, and it's going to contain nitrogen at a certain pressure and a certain temperature. If that's the case, an elbow can only be 45 degrees, let's say. So I can't have a 90-degree elbow because of the pressure, the speed of flow, the flow rate, that's the other thing, etc. So it defines, I can have maybe a 45 angle. I can only have toots of valves, stuff like that. And the reason is it empowers the analysis. So it looks at the flow, looks at the hydraulics in the pipe, and it will tell me this pipe will break under this configuration. The other thing it does is it links to my schematics. So I'll show that also after, but I think in the first class I mentioned, I could have a schematic that using water flow. Water comes in from the lake, goes into a reservoir, gets filtered, gets treated, goes into your house. That's very, very simplistic. It's far more complicated. But what I just said, 5 steps could cover 20, 30 different buildings. But the flow is very simple. And then that flow goes onto an operation screen, so I, the operator, can see, okay, that's what's happening. So there's that synergy. All of that is governed by ISO 15926, governed by the plant standard. Now, if you look at the applications here, this is what gets a little funky. You may say, well, look at that. We've got a couple Bentleys, a couple Auto Intergraphs, a couple Autodesks, and this Aviva. I put Revit here reluctantly. Be very critical. If you notice in Revit 2018 or newer, on the mechanical tab, there's the P&ID button. Sounds exciting. You can link your Revit model to P&IDs. It's the infant in the industry, and it doesn't wholly follow the ISO standards. So I'm very skeptical about that. So I tend to say no. But what happened there is Autodesk has their tool called Plant 3D, but it's newer as well. And what happened with these guys, and I do have a couple of not tricky questions on the subsequent test, but I do know, I ask which one of the following applications is a plant authoring tool that works on AutoCAD? And the answer is Bentley's AutoPlant or Intergraph CADWorks. So what they did was, before Autodesk had their plant application, these geniuses said, we'll fix that. Autodesk, you're going to be stupid. We're going to take our technology and make it work on top of your platform. So remember, AutoCAD is CAD. They brought in the P&ID and the modeling. So I'll show it later, but they have all the specs and all the engine and all that good stuff. So Bentley's OpenPlant is on the MicroStation platform. Bentley's AutoPlant is on the AutoCAD platform. Intergraph SmartPlant is on the Intergraph platform. Intergraph CADWorks is on the AutoCAD platform. Then AutoCAD said, crap, those two are taking our market share. We better make our own. So now we have Autodesk's Plant 3D. Because of that, when we're working on an industrial project and you're connecting into some existing system of data, you will be bound by whatever is active. The concept of a digital deliverable has come from this side of the world long before building and civil. These, especially these schematics, these process and instrumentation diagrams have been driving heavy industrial plants for maybe about 3.5 decades, okay? Aviva PDMS, used quite a bit in the Middle East. When we have those projects, there's no choice. We'll procure, we'll use that software because that's all they're going to want us to deliver it. So I'm going to elaborate on all of these. The point of this, and what I showed at the beginning, the first thing is, sorry, let me get back on there. You're going to have a solution. Never get bogged down in, is it MicroStation, is it AutoCAD, how are we reviewing, etc. These will happen. You're going to have to share. This first one is all next week. No matter what you choose, we're going to share it. We're going to collaborate. It's going to happen. It'll be reviewed and interacted with. There'll be a CAD platform. I'd have to export to one of them or both of them, whatever, and we're going to harness the data. And I hate the discussion on hardware. I have a meeting on Monday when I'm back about why do we want to raise the cost of the computer by $200? Really? Because we need good hardware. We need the right hardware. Autodesk and Bentley are upping it. So in my role, I got to deal with that stuff sometimes. At the end of the day, it's going to be there. Our role as BIM coordinators is about who am I delivering to, who else am I going to deliver to, and how. What's my export? What's my turnover? What's the data? What's the BIM? What do they want? This is all hopefully defined in the EIR. I know my software, so my IT assessment and my capability assessment, are we able to do it? The BIM assessment. When I say structure and you say structure, when I say civil and you say civil, you got to be saying the same thing. So we have the right platform. Then we assess ourselves. Do we have software? Do we have the right hardware and the connectivity, et cetera? Resources, do they need training? Do they need whatever? All that's done. So then we can make the BIM execution plan that satisfies all this piece on the right. That is our role. Too often, we get bogged down in, one item of these. It is what it is. Okay, I am not going to take that long on every slide or else I'll be here for a while. Hold on, let me just shift around here. Okay, so focus just on building BIM authoring tools. And you're going to hear me continually refer to them as that. BIM authoring tools, the tools within which I will be creating my models, BIM authorship. Okay? Focusing just on the top. IBI, we've had to standardize. So that's one thing as well, right? In the world of BIM, anything works. It's all good. It'll do the job. It'll deliver. And I think that's what I have to keep telling people. Get rid of the myth about Revit. In the world of business, I'm not going to use all of these. So IBI, we've standardized on Revit, but we use EcoSim because of some of our Bentley clients have come wise to the fact that, oh, hey, I can get an intelligent model of the building part too. I think I want that. And not Revit because we're not a Revit shop. So we are to use EcoSim. And in Vancouver, we have some that use Vectorworks, more so for the front end concept, but some right through. And we use a whole host of Rhino for conceptual design. Not really for full BIM, but we feed Rhino to Revit, sometimes Vectorworks to Revit. Notice I don't have Tekla on here. Tekla, I noticed a couple of you put that as an authoring tool. Oftentimes that's for authorship beyond design when you're getting more to the fabrication end, but it could definitely be used especially for structural design. So when I started this dialogue, so back in the world of CH2M Hill, so this is about a decade now, I had the Revit versus Bentley fight. And I said, think about painting. I used to try to paint. I said, try. I tried. And I discovered, I hate watercolors. I hated watercolors. I loved oils. At the end of the day, we were both would give me a painting, but it's different. And that's what people get bogged down on when they get right to the technical aspects of software. And I'm going to use this stupid example that bothers me. AutoCAD versus MicroStation. If you've all placed a dimension in AutoCAD, hit the dimension button, point 1, point 2, and then locate your dimension line. Seems pretty simple. Go into MicroStation. Well, guess what they've done? Hit the dimension button, point 1, locate your dimension, point 2. So instead of 1, 2, locate, they did 1, locate, 2. And this bothered me for a decade and a half, almost 2 decades now. It's the dumbest thing, but I don't go to my management when I have to do MicroStation and say, oh, I can't work. I can't do it. Here, watercolor versus oil. I like the oil because I could do a very fine lines. That's actually Saint Jerome. My middle name is Jerome. My son's middle name is Jerome. He's the patron saint. So this is a clear, obvious side note. Patron saint of, I think they called it libraries. And I can't remember the word they used, but it basically in today's age, it's data management. But it was like libraries, books, and something like that. So the patron saint of knowledge gathering. And I thought, how beautiful is it? Like, I thought, obviously, that's my religious heritage. But so each in Catholicism, we all usually have a saint name, and my saint name is the dude that basically managed data 1,000 years ago. So I said, yeah, rock on. Anyway, I like the lines. When I'm in watercolors, I'm trying to make the paint all wet. I'm trying to soak up a lot so I can go in there and try to draw a line and realize, wow, I'm trying to do oil painting with watercolor. That's what people try to do. I'm a Revit user and I'm going to go into Bentley. Another test question. Where's my central model? Well, Bentley doesn't have a central model. Bentley's a federated approach. Oh, I can't do BIM. There's no central. Yes, you can do BIM. There's just no central. And it's like, this mind-boggling approach. I can't do a painting because you're asking me to do oils instead of watercolor, acrylic instead of oil. So I went one by one and I said, well, let me just show some of the differences, right? Here's your oil versus watercolor. In Revit, we make levels. In Bentley, we make levels. Simple as that. Now, I say, take away the preference of how it looks. The concept is there. Bentley actually just now added the ribbon. So for years, some of these examples you'll see, there's no ribbon. So you think, my goodness, the ribbon concept came out in what, 2014? Autodesk, it took them years to put it into AutoCAD, but it was in Revit pretty quickly. So the interface is one thing, but the concept, you're defining levels. These are ISO standard, IFC components. When this goes to IFC, a level is a level. Your floor levels. Walls. The complexity of walls is what do you want the makeup to be, but walls are walls. And you can't be unintelligent. You just have to place walls. You have your generic, you have sandwich walls. They are the same. In Revit, I'll make a family. In Bentley, I make what they call a parametric cell. Guess what? It's a family. That's all it is. Floors. You get the point here, what I'm trying to do? Same concept. Add into this, I always say if I had nothing to do someday, I would want to do this, make this box in every application. And IBI should one day do it in Vectorworks, and I should do it in Allplan because it'll be exactly the same. Floors, flood between walls by points. Doors are, every architect has to deal with the doors. Well, they're all based on a library. Same with windows. When you place these, there are geometric constraints. On here, on the instance of the door, I'll have all of the other parameters. Here's the geometry parameters in the instance. Here in Bentley, here's the geometry. If I scrolled that down, would be all my parameters, all my hardware, my fire rating, etc. It's all there. Specialty components like curtain walls, same thing, right? And the trick, the real challenge, it's just like the dimension line. How do I make this in Revit if I really only know how to make a family? Sorry, how do I make this in Bentley if I only know how to make a family in Revit? And I'll tell you, probably very easily. And it's intriguing because Bentley has what they call parametric builder. Revit, you open up an RFA or you build a component and save it as a family. But they're the same. Once I'm in there manipulating, it's unbelievable how common they are because they have to be, because it's a curtain wall and it's ISO standard. Place a roof, same thing. Slopes, all architectural driven. Or is it a gable roof, a gambrel roof, hip roof? None of that changes. Stairs are fun. And again, why this is so important is because we want to analyze our models at some point, right? So if we're able to analyze our stairs, then we're able to clearly analyze path to exit. So if I want to do a code analysis, I need to know my stair width. I need to know my rise and my tread. All of that's geometric metadata that's sitting right here. I would never draw lines and extrude it in the days of 3D modeling 20 years ago. Never. I need data. And the tools are so profusely intelligent that the data is always there for me. Handrail, the same thing. Creating handrail, you can get as inventive as you want, but handrail is handrail. From a code perspective, from a design perspective, I want the aesthetic, but I want to be able to check. Is my handrail this high? If it's not, bad. If it is, good. Simple. And there's no subjective thinking. It just has to be what it has to be. And all that stuff gets built into these tools. Create drawings. Visualize them however you want. So on the right, I show the traditional look that Revit does out of the box. Looks like my pencil. Yay for pencils. On the right, Bentley uses what it calls symbology. So I say I want it to be this color, and then it prints by color, and then I could make it look like the Revit view if I wanted to. I can also force tags to show up, or oh my God, brain fart. Parameter values, parameters. Tags in Bentley, parameters in Revit. And then you can use whatever symbol to make it show. The data is all there, exactly the same. And you guys in your Revit course, this is what you guys are doing. Structural. There's a backbone library. I think next week, in 2 weeks, I show a bit of what that data is there. All of this is to support structural analysis. When I place these columns, all the data I enter is so vehemently important. And I think I described once, this is a column. I'm not going to place this column and then rotate it 90 degrees and say, yay, now I have a beam. No, you've just destroyed any hope of structural analysis. And I've seen people do that. Why is the building falling? I don't know, it looks fine in the model, but not in the analysis. And it's because of simple things like that. Ductwork. It's all based on the ducting standards. And some of them are based on how do we actually spool ducts. So what are the sizes? What increments? Am I going to make a width? So here you see it's 18 inches wide, 12 inches deep. Am I going to make something 12.1 and 18.6653? I'd be crazy if I did that. So what these tools do is they actually prevent that. So they have a little bit of forced selection, which is what the plant tools do profusely in the plant side. But we want to control this a bit. Same with cable trays. So cable trays are very specific because they have huge turning radiuses that have to be accounted for. And both tools, Revit and Bentley, have pretty good electrical tools built in that allow you to accommodate this. When you get to analysis, the question will be, great, how many wires fit in my cable tray? Do I need 2 cable trays to fit more wires? How much of current is flowing through my wires? What's my draw at the electrical feed? What's the current and the voltage at all the distribution points? Same with airflow. I skipped that here. When this is all right, what's my air pressure here? Once I turn the corner, what's my air pressure there? And these are your 90-degree square ducts. What if I turn them into these 90-degree elbows? How does that better my flow? Because I don't have the hard stop as I do here. The other thing Bentley's done. So as I said, Autodesk is profusely notorious for, I'm going to buy a bunch of stuff, have these buckets, Autodesk, AutoCAD, Revit, Navisworks, Inventor, and others, and that's it. And then we complain as users. Oh my God, I need to use Inventor to make a component. How do I get it into a Revit family? Autodesk says, okay, we'll try to get a way to get from Inventor into Revit, and now we can. Bentley, this is from 5 years ago, said, you know what? There's a whole host of really awesome Revit files out there, Revit families. Let's build an importer that can bring an RFA into Bentley and map the parameters to Bentley data. And a wonderful, wonderful thing. So anytime, and this has actually made IBI a lot happier, because anytime we have a Bentley project, there's none of this, oh my God, we're going to waste so much time remaking all of our content. No, we're just going to drop our content in. So very powerful. This is what Bentley calls its RFA translation or RFA interpreter. So this helps when they, because they have a good foothold on the civil side, this helps them convince their civil-based clients that, so transit clients, you can ask for the building to be in Bentley's EcoSim, and don't worry, your consultants won't revote because all of their content can be brought in. The consultants will still complain if they're Revit users, but they can't say we lose all our content. Just a brief one here, because the data is interoperable based on the IFC standard, the ISO standard. This was a research project I did with the University of Toronto. Again, this is now 2011. And we said, let's make a tool to pass data to and from Revit and Bentley. So we built this little IFC commenting tool. So it was a little add-on. And we said, we just want to start to add dialogue to components. So this is added to a Revit role. Is this a question about the roof? Somebody then takes that file, brings it into Bentley. Okay, so this is an IFC, this is a Revit model, goes out to IFC. Oops, IFC comes into Bentley, and I can add a comment to the response to the comment. And then we have a general dialogue that goes back and forth between Revit and Bentley. In Revit, I can bring those comments back in. Now, it was a prototype, it was an idea. And the reason we saw value to this and why I would show this to you is this is the power. Now, this isn't commercial or nothing, but this is the power of traversing information to and from applications. The critical thing, though, is understanding what can traverse. Okay, so using IFC as the lowest common denominator allows it to happen. Now, you'll go in the industry, you'll hear IFC sucks. You say, well, why? And it's always down to this. I tried to bring an IFC model from Bentley into Revit and then model in Revit, and I couldn't do it because you name it, or vice versa. And I say, well, obviously, IFC is never really meant to say, let me go from Revit, stop authoring, go to Vectorworks, and continue. It's allowing us to traverse the lowest common denominator. So if I was in Vectorworks and you were in Revit, I would say, I need your model, what you're authoring, as a backdrop for my work. So let's say you're doing architectural and structural, and I'm just doing building mechanical. I want to run my ducts in and around the walls, the ceiling, the columns, etc. So I just need to bring in an IFC model. So Vectorworks knows what's there, lets me know where I have interferences, whatever, and I can model as if it was in there. I don't need all the specialty of Revit. I don't need to further your design because it's your design. I need to bring it in as a reference. And where the industry is looking at ways to automate that. Where it breaks is when somebody says, I need IFC to let me go in and back out. It's not what it's meant to do. It's meant to encapsulate geometry and data and feed it elsewhere. Where it works excellently is with the analysis tools. Feed it to solar analysis, feed it to energy analysis, feed it to whatever. And nobody complains because nobody thinks it's going to go there and then I'm going to redesign the building in Sefaria or in whatever. It's not going to happen. I'm going to use the data to do something with it. So just conceptually keep that in mind. And then here just showing in Celibri all of the data, the comments were recognized because it was standard IFC taxonomy. So conceptually, you grab data and you do more with it. So that's the building world, and I highlight Revit. It's the most prevalent. It's what IBI uses, but as I said, we use others as well. Civil BIM authoring tools, okay? When I say it this way, sometimes I get, the dirty looks, like BIM is for buildings. BIM has building authoring tools. BIM has civil authoring tools. And I press this. Civil being not structural, not building structural, okay? Structural design is governed by the IFC standard, which is why it's placed inside buildings. This concept of civil structures, it's just, I want to say semantics that we have to just overcome, especially in the industry where a civil engineer does building structures. It's just, we have to just understand the differences. So civil tools, talked a bit about this already. Couple things that I want to stress on here. So if I ask a question, which civil BIM authoring tool sits on AutoCAD as its native, it's Civil 3D. Hence, it's called AutoCAD Civil 3D. People don't know that. And it's made by Autodesk. I've heard people bastardize that. It's all good. What people don't know, and what I like to make sure BIM coordinators know, is the concept of a data shortcut project, or a DSP. Used very heavily when I worked at CH2M Hill, not so heavily when I'm working here at IBI Group, which I think is quite interesting, but still, it's there to be understood. And as a BIM coordinator, the question that I like to ask is, are we harnessing a data shortcut project? Now, to ask that, you're sitting there saying, why? What is it? And I think the easiest way to put it is, it's like in the world of Civil 3D, there is no central model. So in the world of Revit, if I place a wall, you see my wall. I sync, you sync, wonderful. In the world of Civil 3D, I have an alignment. What do? So I'm in my DWG, you're in your DWG, federated, not centralized, right? We're not in the same DWG. So the data shortcut says, Brent, what are you doing? And I say, well, I'm going to make alignment number 1, and I'm going to make pipe network number 2. So I make it, and that's housed in the data shortcut. Your DWG then looks and says, alignment 1, pipe network 2 are already created. So you get all the settings that Brent made. Now, what do you make it? And let's say, well, you know what? I'm going to make pipe network number 1. Awesome, make it. And then I get to see it. And the settings would be, simple things like the layer, etc., but more complex in a pipe network, like What's the flow? What's the material? What are the particulars of it? The slope, etc. So I know. And if I'm modeling, it's a 10-kilometer project, I'm at kilometer 1, you're at kilometer 9, it's the same pipe network. When this thing gets built, it's going to flow through the whole thing. So pipe network 1 in your kilometer has got to be the same as mine. And guess what? Whoever gets that point of merging, they better merge or we're going to have a problem on the project. That's a data shortcut. I'm baffled when they're not used, but on massive projects, they have to be used. Oftentimes, if you're doing site work, civil site. So I always say a building doesn't float, right? So you got all this massive Revit model, it's going to sit on a building, confined by a site. So usually, might be one person working on it. He or she has all the data. If there's multiple people, they might set up a data shortcut to share things. So that's what a data shortcut project is. It ties together data definitions across multiple DWG files. Ties together data definitions across your federated DWG files. Okay? That's data shortcut. OpenRoads and all the Bentley applications do it a little differently. They don't need a data shortcut because Bentley's technology allows you to reference DGNs. So you're getting federated, but when you reference, all the data comes with it. So what always irked me in AutoCAD, this is way back, you do an XREF, and that XREF is nice, one big, massive blob. If I want to copy something through the XREF, you've got to bind it, whatever, or I've got to go to the drawing, I've got to W block it, bring it, just ew. And I always hated that. Same with Revit. If I link in CAD, it's one big massive blob. It's like, okay, so well, especially if you link in a 3D DGN or a 3D DWG, you've got to place it. And I'll show an example of that at the end. DGN, instead of XREF, it's called reference. I reference in another DGN, and I can actually copy through. If I just want, let's say that line or that component, I'll just copy it into my drawing through the reference. That technology allows me to bring the data through as well. So if there's a wall definition, a pipe definition, a door definition, it's all there. So it works beautifully, an alignment definition. So a digital train model in the DGN world basically says, here are all the federated files. Here they all come together. Here's all your data. Now from all of this connected data, what do you want to do? And you can manipulate it. So it's a pretty powerful thing. Okay, so these are the tools. And I only show one, but it's Inroad, Geopack, MX, Open. It's all conceptually the same. Then there's this, my favorite. You install the site toolbar in Revit. And you have site tools. And now it gets a little more intelligent. You can import GBXML. You can OpenXML. Oh, the XML of Civil, OpenXML, I think. And you can import GBXML. You can bring things in. Awesome. But I describe this as the architect's site tools. Okay, civil engineers can't use this. There's no integration of civil data. There's no civil analytics. There's no civil anything. What this does is it allows me to connect or bring a civil 3D model into Revit for me to use as a potential reference. And I think that's critical. So that goes back to that IFC concept. I'm not going to export Revit to IFC so you can model in Vectorworks. I'm not going to import Civil 3D into Revit so that the civil engineer can now come and do engineering in Revit, site analysis, cut fill analysis. They wouldn't do that. But what this lets me do, especially this is for me the best one, as an architect, I might bring in the civil, first, I want a civil model. So I'll ask the civil engineer, send me your Civil 3D file, or point to me if we're using a collaboration system next week, and I'll bring it into Revit, and this would help me as an architect to say, okay, so there's a gentle slope, and then there's an insane slope. So as I'm laying out this road on my site, I want to make sure that the civil engineer, obviously the civil engineer is not going to make the road go up this hill and back down the hill. That would be nuts. But I got to make sure I leave him room. So my building layout, is there enough room? That's the coordination. If the answer is no, and the guy says, well, just shift it this way. But what about my required parking? That's my zoning bylaw. So there's a lot at play here, and I can't move it because I have this water element on the site and this water element here. So there's a couple of constraints that it's so vehemently important that this coordination can happen. On the flip side, I want to send my model to civil for them to bring it in. But if you ever hear, well, we'll get civil to use the site tools in Revit, the answer is no. No, we won't. Okay, and that's the distinction I want to make sure you guys take away. Take away that this is the architect's playground for civil, or the building designer's playground. Landscape. Landscape BIM is in the nether world of BIM, okay? There is no landscape BIM tool, and there's actually a real good document. It will take me too long to find it, so I won't try. It's a pink book published in the UK called, I think it's just called BIM for Landscape. And it just talks about the fact that there is no tool. So we're gonna get situations like this. So we ask the question, we have landscape architecture. What do we wanna do? Revit is on there because oftentimes landscape is dealing with rectilinear portions of the site immediately outside the building. So imagine you have your building and then you have like a landscape planter, maybe multiple levels on your building that are landscaped. Basically the underpinning of what you see is a Revit model. Then we use Revit. The best example is hard urban landscape. So you walk into any downtown area, you see all of these stepped landscapes. Well, they're all on top of parking garages or whatever. There's models, or there should be models of all the stuff underneath. So if I have a Revit concrete slab, well, I just need to add the detail, add the layer of what the landscape will be. So we might add a landscape slab. So a slab representing the layers of landscape, and then put in components. Doable in Revit. Revit will not do landscapes that are undulating like what you see here in Civil 3D. Here we'll take a Civil 3D digital terrain model, representing the landscape, and depict it. So then they might place components that look like landscape, either from a library of things they've already made, or using a tool like what you see here, LandFX. Now I put LandFX because it's unique in that it actually has a database behind it. Next week, you can curse me because I took a very simple project example. It's a Revit building. Awesome. But it's going to sit on a site, Civil 3D. It's going to have a bit of landscape, LandFX. What makes it unique is that it's got a SQL database backbone. So it actually has all the components in the SQL database. And when you place components, you place information from that database. And then the database allows you to count and understand what's in your model from a landscape perspective. So it's a pretty cool tool. Another one out there is LandCAD, made by Keyscape. And they're cool. They met with me and they said, hey, we're IFC compatible. I said, hey, let me see. They sent me an IFC file and I shook my head. And I said, I don't know what you guys are doing, but it's not good. So they're trying to find their space, but the tools exist. So the way I describe it is they're usually going to be a layer put on top of either Civil 3D or Revit or Bentley's tools or something. Then there's ArcGIS. When I do the case studies, and maybe even next week, I talk a bit about this, but the concept of this is mapping data layers. So imagine this. This is one of the stadiums. I can't remember what example this is. Imagine the BIM for this. It's quite impressive, right? In the world of GIS, it's a circle. And the asset is called stadium under the layer of building. That's it. Because GIS is at the massive scale. So I always say, if we're working properly from macro to micro, you've got your city layer, your street layer, you get to your building, the building as a whole. Then you kick in your BIMs and you get into the inside of the building, right down to the components and asset management, macro to micro. So that's the civil world. In IBI group, we actually use all of these. I actually, again, my only experience with MX was back in my CH Tom Hill days, only in Australia and Singapore. But we use these, which are all now branded through Open Roads. So if you're doing civil-based work, civil engineering, linear infrastructure, you're going to come across them all. And if you're doing just building stuff, you'll see them both. Plant tools. This is your, as I was describing, this is your heavy process automation, manufacturing. The critical thing with these, ISO 15926, the ability to analyze movement and flow within pipes and linkages to your PNIDs. That's the critical, link to your schematics. But this is what the authoring tool looks like. I think I'll talk about schematics later on. But this is it. Looks like any other tool except for this. So in the days of yesterday, draw a circle and extrude, right? Yay, I'm making a pipe. So easy. Draw a circle and extrude. In the days of 2D, what's my pipe? It's a center line. Done. So this is plant space. So this is now a legacy tool in the Bentley world, but they would yell at me. This was like 15 years ago. You've made my life harder. Why? Because I can't draw my line. Well, what do you mean? You draw the center line of the pipe. Yeah, but I got to fill out all this stuff. Well, you should have been doing that to begin with. What are you modeling? What are you drawing? Well, and then you get all these dumb conversations, right? The point is, like place wall in Revit. What wall are you placing? What door are you placing? Is it fire rated? Is it generic? Make a selection. Here, there's a little more selections, but they're all controlled. So notice the blue things, that's all I can pick. Everything else just happens. So when I pick raw water, it sets all these other things. Then I can pick a couple sizes, and away I go. This is what the database looks like. So this is a piping spec. And as an architect, learning this was intriguing. But all it basically does is it says, for this service, so for atmospheric air, this is the pipe spec, C208, PVC, fiberglass reinforced plastic, FRP. So that's your pipe spec. That's your size. I can go 0.125 to 144. Okay, so 144, can't remember what system measure. This must be imperial in inches. So I think that's 144 inches down to 0.125 inch. Exposed installation, no lining, and that's its coating. And that's its spec. I'm going to talk about linking to specs later. Very critical. Once this data is set, I model. And it's that easy. So that was Bentley's plant space. Bentley Auto Plant. And I notice I put here Auto Plant piping for AutoCAD. This is Bentley's application that sits on top of AutoCAD. Same concept. There's a database. And it's just like this is your typical BIM diagram. Put your building in the middle instead of your piping. It's the same thing. Okay? Notice the ability, though, to analyze flow, pipe stress. That's the critical piece. And the linkage to the PNID. All of these pipe tools will have a linkage to the PNID. Very critical. This is what it looks like. AutoCAD interface. There you go. What's your spec? What's your size? Insulation. All of these values. Some autofill, some you select. It tracks what you place. Has the spec backbone. Again, watercolor versus oil. It's all the same. This is the ISO 15926. This is where it comes into play. So when you say all these things, what's a pipe, a fastener, a nozzle, an orifice, reducer, spacer, it knows what they are. Valves, different types of valves. It's all common. All that nomenclature is defined by the spec standard. I can't remember what the OLET was, and whatever, doesn't matter. It's not on any test. It's a defined term. And you get this. There's your model. There's all of your pieces in the flow stream. This is the schematic. So all this stuff down here is all that stuff over there. Okay? It tracks it. It makes sure they're in sync. Auto generation of an isometric. Grab a flow stream, give me an isometric. It auto dimensions it all. It auto populates all the components. Powerful when modeled right with a good spec. Intergraph SmartPlant P&ID or SmartPlant 3D. Same concept. You're going to notice commonalities here. Used to be called PDS. Now it's called SmartPlant PDS. This is the old lookout, how it looked. All the same stuff though. You're going to notice this is decades. Loading from your P&ID, what are your bend radiuses, the types of your valves, the branches. All of these are piping components, all explicitly tied to a database that's compatible with ISO 15926. Bentley's open plant, same thing. Grab a spec, place a component. It allows you critical. It allows you to pull specs from different systems. So in keeping with Bentley, they allow you to put Revit families inside their tool. They allow you to take specs from other systems and drop them into their open plant. Pretty sure I asked that as one of the questions, either true, false, or as a question. Open plant is the one that's specifically designed to bring in specs from any other system explicitly. That's plant. We don't do a lot of plant work, but when we do, we try to use the Autodesk Plant 3D tool just because to try to have that consistency in the DWG format. I didn't show CADWorks. Again, it's Plant 3D and CADWorks would look very similar to AutoPlant. Sits on AutoCAD. Hit place pipe, pick your spec, decide whatever you're allowed to decide, model, link back to your P&ID, find out if you did good. So I know like that part's a lot, and that's why I dedicate one class to this. Because from when we talk about authoring tools, there's a lot of things to consider. And that doesn't even touch then on these next pieces here. So I'll say a BIM model review tool or just model review. And it's amazing in my George Brown class, I say, who's familiar with Navisworks? And like one person out of 100 put their hand up. And I said, wow, because they're all Revit. That's all they've taught there. I keep stressing, Revit is fine. It does its thing. You can do live model review if everything's in there. Navisworks is explicitly designed to take in anything. Okay, that's the Navisworks beauty. If you have Inventor, SolidWorks, Bentley, anything Bentley, Revit, ArchiCAD, Tekla, whatever, Allplan. I've never brought in an Allplan, but I'm sure it can. BrizCAD, Vectorworks, everything comes in, and then you see it. Excellent on geometry, very important point here for test and just knowledge. Excellent on geometry, not the best with data. So its thing is we'll bring all the geometry for you to look at and see, but it doesn't worry about data. Navigator is a flip. I describe it. They're the snob of BIM review. As a snob, they will only bring in things that they've guaranteed you get model and data. Navisworks, bring in anything. You want to see the geometry. Bentley, model and data come together. So I'll show it in a sec. They actually have a plugin to Revit. They have a plugin to SmartPlant 3D. They're making a plugin for Civil 3D. They've been making it for years. It'll eventually show up. They have a plugin for ArchiCAD, I believe. So there, as a Revit user, I push a button. It turns my central model. It exports my central model to an iModel. and brings all the data. So I can click on any of this stuff from Revit, see all of the parameters, interact with it, and do stuff with it. So a very, very powerful capability. IFC, any building BIM authoring tool. Bentley will allow me to do an iModel for all their civil applications. Any building BIM authoring tool can be exported to an IFC. And then you can use Solibri, BIMsite, DDS CAD, whatever. My preference is Solibri. Awesome, awesome tool, especially the free viewer, let alone the purchase. IFC brings geometry plus data. And as I've said, I like lowest common denominator. So again, you can see here, I'm always using the same model. It transverses. If there's something funky, funky won't go, but for the most part, everything will. IFC. 3D PDF. More so for just viewing. You get a little bit of layer data, component data, things you could turn off and on. So really here, it's just seeing the Revit families. I could turn each family off. Usually it might show me work sets. In the Bentley world, it brings over the layers and levels. So interesting. Easy to break a 3D PDF. So in Bentley, you print to Adobe, Activate 3D. In Revit, I believe it only works with the Bluebeam install, Bluebeam print to 3D PDF. If your model is really, 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 really complex, it won't work. And I've seen that, especially with heavy plant models. For the most part, it does its thing. And then a lot of mobile application review. This is just Bentley Navigator Mobile, BIM 360 Glue Mobile, you name it. There's one of you listed in your matrix, the mobile one for ArchiCAD, BIMX, I think it is. Can't remember the Graphisoft one. Every vendor has a mobile app. I don't know of a good IFC mobile viewer, but there should be one out there too. And then some other tools. So conceptual, I mentioned we use a lot of Rhino and Grasshopper, and maybe in another class, I'll show some of our examples in the case study one. But SketchUp and InfraWorks, a lot of people will say, I know SketchUp. What about InfraWorks? InfraWorks, I describe it sort of as the SketchUp for civil. It's done by Autodesk, so it migrates to Civil 3D very well. Bentley, of course, they're different. So I believe theirs is now called Concept Station, and that will migrate into OpenRoads. So these are like, these conceptual ones are kind of in parallel streams. The beauty about InfraWorks is kind of like GIS. It brings in a whole host of mapping things, mapping data sources, but then lets you model components of roads and bridges and sidewalk, and just very quickly, very schematically, but it kind of interacts with the brought in data. So a very cool tool, some analysis, some plan and profile analysis, and then you can export it to Civil 3D and do proper and more advanced work. So pretty cool. Point Cloud, Recap, most people know Recap. Do people know Descartes? Bentley's version, do the same thing, Point Cloud, bringing in cleanup, manipulation, etc. Again, they both do the job. I have no preference. 4D schedule simulation. Here are a couple like Vika, Asta, Synchro. Some of you named some others. Awesome. Links to schedules, Microsoft Project, Primavera P6. I hate other like simple projects, simple schedules, or you can make your own. Oftentimes, and I don't like it, but architects will be asked, can you do a quick schedule simulation for us? And I'll say, sure, bottom to top. So you can just make a simple task, and there might be, I don't know, 10, 15 tasks, and you just make the thing grow over time. And then they'll say, oh no, I want to see something a little better. I'll say, yeah, go to the constructor and talk about construction logistics and stuff that I don't know as an architect. I could pretend and make them pretty, and then you can hold me liable and you could try to sue me. Week 9. The prospect of being sued is fun. And so things like that. And it doesn't retract from BIM. It just, for me, it enhances regions of responsibility. Why would you ask the architect to give a construction simulation schedule? I will tell you how the thing is going to grow out of the ground, not how the cranes and stuff is going to be brought in. That's a construction schedule. So fabrication, this is where I bring in Tekla. So usually we don't see Tekla as an authoring tool. We usually see it bring in Ecosim or Revit or ArchiCAD or something and bring it to this higher LOD, level of development. So I'll do 300. This will bring it to the 350 range, how it's going to be assembled and constructed, and then 400, how it was actually constructed. And from a region, from a liability perspective, no structural engineer in design will ever do that, because that's always done by a shop drawing engineer and then a fabricator slash installer. So as the BIM world, you might say, well, you can. Sure, that's why we have level of development. We won't as designers, someone will as a fabricator. So, and I remember, I always have to remind myself, this is BIM 1040. When you get to BIM 2040, you get into, okay, so now I am the fabricator, I am the contractor. How do I define what I'm supposed to do and why we do it, et cetera? Room data management. So these are tools that link to Revit. So Codebook, DeRufus is in the same manufacturer as Vectorworks and ArchiCAD and Allplan. So that's Nementschek. Pretty good company, very well known in Europe, lesser in North America, but pretty phenomenal tools. So Codebook kind of looks like this, connects to Revit, in a nutshell. It connects to Revit and sees all the spaces. And in a SQL database has a list of spaces. Somewhere else, usually a spreadsheet or in this SQL database, I, the owner, am saying what needs to be in these spaces. So imagine it's a hospital. And as a hospital owner, I say, in the operating room, I need these 10 things. In a patient room, I need these 20 things. Simple. Codebook looks at Revit and says, hey, I see the 2 operating rooms. The 10 things aren't in there. I'm going to put them in there. Codebook ties to your Revit family library and puts the things in there. Same with the patient room. We'll drop the 20 things in there. I, as a designer, I can then place them properly. And then I have Codebook constantly looking. If somebody comes in and says, oh crap, all the patient room need this one more thing, they add it to the list in Codebook, and then Codebook tells me, the designer, hey, there's one more thing. I'll place it in each room, and now you can locate it properly. So pretty powerful stuff for that. And then Viz, I can talk about Viz forever. 3D Max is our most common, and we usually use that to bring in models from anywhere. SketchUp, Rhino, Revit, Ecosim, OpenRoad, Civil 3D, doesn't matter. We use V-Ray as a rendering engine, but you could use Mental Ray or whatever. I don't know, my team is convinced the V-Ray is the way to go, and I say, whatever. As long as you're all consistent, it's good. And then we feed often from here into Unity or Unreal to do VR or AR. And it's usually both. They said there's pluses and minuses to both of them, so we're actually exploring both. Unreal is a little more common. Unity is for some more advanced specific ones. And then lastly, so you have all this software. You're going to have to share. We're going to talk about collaboration next week. But there's some fundamental things. And this is where, you'll say, well, great, Brent, Autodesk, Bentley, they don't talk. Well, they could. So a couple things in the Revit world. I mentioned that Bentley has introduced this iModel plugin. Essentially, make an iModel, put it into your collaboration system, reference it in to your Bentley, and it appears. It's as simple as that. This is Bentley's Ecosim, and that's a Revit model dropped in. What about going the other direction? Going to CAD, I mean. You have your CAD exports. You can do DGN or DWG, open it up in AutoCAD or MicroStation. Model as needed. I hate modeling in CAD. It could be done. Going into Revit. Revit is funky. So I can simply link. And you're linking in, I hate how they do this. So it's one of those Revit, please make it better. I'm linking in a CAD format, and I could link in DWG models or DGNs. So you can link in your Civil 3D. Here I'm linking in a piping model. But you know how Revit is with linkages, right? So browse to my system. I'll talk about collaboration systems next week, but I notice I keep saying that. Position my reference in the Revit model, and there it is. So here's my reference blob. So this was actually a project we were working on. The model was in Revit. This piping was done in one of the DGN applications. You place it in. It's a blob and it's nowhere. So we usually put a marker. Here's where the intersection of the floor is. Place the piping in, locate it right. Now, at least in the world of Revit, we can very quickly see in a live modeling environment, are we okay? And not wait till we get to Navisworks and process clashes, etc. When very quickly I can look and see, I got a clash right there. This box is hitting that pipe. Let's just fix it. Let's make it right. So closing this, we're going to get requirements from clients. So remember, you don't want to go to a client and say, are you crazy? Okay? And remember when I talked about BIM recipes for success? You can have a good recipe and you can have really bad recipes, and that's all fine. Okay? So when a client says, deliver me my civil files, open roads, but I want my building in Revit. And right away, you want to go to them and say, are you crazy? And then they'll say to you, oh, and by the way, you have to use this building mechanical subconsultant. They're a very tiny, small 3-person firm, but they, whatever the reason is, you have to use them. Okay, but they only use ArchiCAD. You say, really? So then you walk away saying, my building is going to be all Revit, except for building mechanical, that's going to be ArchiCAD, and my linear civil is going to be all Open Roads DGN. What a crappy recipe, but away you go. So imagine why I'm saying this right now. What do you think is going to be in those assignments next week, right? It's not going to be, here's a building that's 100% Revit. How would you share? That's too easy, right? You're going to have things like this because that's what happens. And you can't go to the client and say, you're nuts, we're not doing it, because the client will say, okay, I'm going to go to the next bidder and they'll do it. And suddenly I lost a $3 million commission because I don't want to go to my BIM coordinator and upset their morning, and let's figure out an answer. So remember, geometry can always traverse. Data doesn't always. So in that example, my building mechanical is in ArchiCAD. What are my options? Well, we have the IFC file. So very easily, you have to set up a workflow and a procedure to say, we're going to go Revit, IFC, ArchiCAD, ArchiCAD, IFC, Revit. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to share and collaborate? How often? And that BIM execution plan better state that this has to happen. Stressing the leadership of the project BIM lead. That's us. And decisions like this are made so early in the project. And if you don't think about it, all of a sudden the mechanical will say, what are you talking about? I don't have time to export to IFC every week. I didn't sign up for this. I'm a small entity. I'm going to lose all my profit. I can't. All I could do is give you my ArchiCAD file. And that's all I can commit to. So every week you get an ArchiCAD file. Well, isn't that great? Your firm doesn't own ArchiCAD. So now you have to buy ArchiCAD, $5,000 a seat, last time I checked. We had to do that at CH2M Hill. Client wanted ArchiCAD as the deliverable. We had to purchase ArchiCAD, bring our files into ArchiCAD, make sure we had a deliverable to give them. So maybe that's the answer. But if we do this all up front, maybe as a small entity, I realize, oh, you know what, file export IFC, and then throw it into a collaboration system, a cloud hosted something. Maybe that's not too bad at all. Maybe I'll do it. So keep that in mind. Each year, interoperability becomes more and more seamless. Revit, link in ArchiCAD. Well, I don't see that there yet. One day, And when they do that, I got to make the assignments a little more hard, I guess. But one day, interoperability, right? I made this slide and I showed this in week one more than 10 years ago. I could have these blobs of things, people all over the globe, multiple authoring tools, everything could come together. And in theory, that could happen. So imagine that's your building. Imagine I have Revit, I have EcoSim, and I have Smart Plant for the plumbing, which is overkill, but whatever. Okay? Architectural and structural are here, mechanical and electrical here, plumbing is here. It can all come together, feed and deliver. If you're interoperable, work sharing, common standards, common procedures, and an awesome BIM lead. Okay? Results in this, and we could work. We can make things happen. Okay? Always back to, what are you BIMing? Why are you BIMing it? Make sure scope, schedule, budget is there. Don't do more things than you have to do. Are there any client requirements? How do we all share to make things work? That's the picture coming together. And that's why I spend, my goodness, a lot of time talking about software. Questions, comments? See if there's anything in the chat window. Is MEP and plant similar? So usually in the industry, in most North America, Europe specifically, but even here in China, I've seen a lot, and in Australia, sorry, MEP is usually buildings, and it's usually, so the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing in buildings. Plant is usually more so process plant, process mechanical, so heavy piping, and the critical thing is the linkages to PNIDs and the analytical tools. So that's the main difference between the two. What are the common BIM tools used in a construction site for engineers and architects? That's a challenge because it depends on what you're doing. So usually in construction, the most common are BIM review tools. You know, I will talk a lot more about this when we do the case studies. Okay, I am back. I apparently lost my connection. Now my connection is back. I don't even know if it's oh, it is still recording. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Okay, so what was I saying? Yeah, so when they are, is the chat still there? No, okay. So the perfect world would be they're using the same tools as what the designers are using. So if we're in Revit, they're in Revit, there's that continuity. Oftentimes, this is a very long answer, I'm sorry. If it's a design bid build, so that's the contractual arrangement where I do my own work and then design is done and we give it to the contractor, I'm going to do whatever I want or whatever the client wants. And if the client wants something, the contractor will do the same. If the client doesn't want anything, I might do my work and the contractor will then have to change it to whatever they want. If it's design build, public-private partnership, or any of those types of arrangements, we hopefully in the BIM execution plan, we've defined what the tools are up front. And then the contractor knows as they're receiving data, they're going to be receiving Revit or Civil 3D or whatever, and then they can further it. And they have to have the logistics of how to further their content while we're still designing ours. So that's what's fun in the design build. What I mean by that is I might be still laying out the building. They take the concrete, start to pour the footings and the foundation. Now all of a sudden that's all fixed. So those components stay fixed, but everything else is still being worked on. So there's that back and forth that has to be dealt with. Cool. Any other thoughts, or while you think of anything? Closing housekeeping. So next week's, oh, one more chat popped in. Hold on. What software can we use for campus master planning? Lots. So we actually do a lot of master planning with Rhino and Grasshopper to use parametric design. So we do that quite a bit. The other one we use a lot is simply Civil 3D. So unfortunately, sometimes it ends up being just 2D AutoCAD, but usually Civil 3D we use for master planning and land development. So it gives that element of intelligence draped on top of a terrain, a simplistic digital terrain model. And then Rhino and Grasshopper allow us to do some pretty cool manipulations that I'll show you. Cool. Next week, I'm going to go very crazy on collaboration. The most important thing. So this opens up in 3 o'clock today. So you'll see what we have next week. The preamble, something to think about what collaboration means. And then here's where the assignment opens up. So we'll go next week. We'll go through the presentation first and talk about the assignment. And it is my favorite assignment because I do have a passion for collaboration. And yeah, this for me, this all came on the London Olympics. And it was, how do I get 46 entities to talk and share when they all wanted to do their own thing and they weren't contracted to do anything outside of the norm. So it was pretty interesting. So BIM execution planning, know your software, know how you're going to share, and then and know what you have to do. So you can see the progression here. Once we get past week 5, you know, once we know software and sharing, talk about things we can do, reanalyze deliverable requirements, and now we have a complete package. Get to a technical solution, and then spend a couple of weeks talking about why this stuff just doesn't work seamlessly when the lawyers get involved. On that, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm tired. Thank you all for your attention. And I hope I wasn't engaging as normal. I feel tired. So have a good day, everybody. Thank you. And talk to you all next week. And if you have any lingering discussion topic, get something in before it closes tomorrow. And the 2 of you that haven't done the quiz, do the quiz. All right. Have a good day, everybody.